Time kills profit. Just like in sales, right? Time kills sales. And every day that a project, whether it's a product or a service, it continues, in quote inventory, it's collecting more days of overhead. And the number one way to increase your top line, your gross profit, and your operating profit is raising prices. It's the quickest and fastest and most direct way. Any price increase drops to the bottom line.
This is the company that has 4 service lines, but one of them they really should just diversify away from. Yes, it generates 50% of their revenue today, but it's only responsible for 15% of their profit, and it's not the place to do. It sucks up their best people.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel. And again, we brought back a perennial favorite. My good dear friend, Kevin Bassett, is back here again, and he and I are going to be talking about a dozen or more CFO secrets to make your company more profitable. For those that have not yet met Kevin, Kevin is a successful entrepreneur who has built payroll companies and other businesses. He's owner of construction companies, but his main business is a CPA firm. He has entered the world of public accounting years and years ago, before opening up his own firm roughly 20 years ago. He's done his work and has been my tax strategist and CPA now for almost 20 years. He's fantastic at what he does. But one of the things that he has that's quite special is that with his clients, a subset of them, he works playing the role of a virtual CFO, he and his team members with that part. So in the world of businesses, we're all going to start off with a bookkeeper, and then we're going to graduate to a controller. And at some point, if we grow the business large enough, 50 million, 100 million plus, we're going to need a full-time CFO for that company. But usually, earlier on, we don't have that need. Instead, we're going to work with a fractional CFO or a virtual CFO who might on a monthly basis or quarterly basis come in. So Kevin and I are going to share with you and pretend that we're your virtual CFO. What are the things, the tips or tricks that we use from our toolbox to take and help a company very quickly with a low degree of effort and a low degree of risk increase their profitability, which also increases its enterprise value and makes the business more vibrant, more durable, and quite frankly, more enjoyable to own. So without further ado, enjoy this week's episode of The Business Coach. Well, Kevin, welcome back to the Business Coach Podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing great. A pleasure to be back. Hope you're doing well.
Hey, I want to ask you, so my kids are in their, right here finishing up middle school and in the middle of high school. And your daughters are either all the way out of college or are in college with that. I guess I want to ask you, what's one thing you never realized as a dad it was going to happen or come one day? At least you didn't emotionally realize it, that all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I really recognize that now. I'm looking for a little advice, I guess, from myself.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the big thing is the teenage years didn't realize that I'd suddenly become such an idiot to them and just not smart at all. But then later, after college, suddenly I'm smart again. So that's kind of a thing.
I'm laughing at that. So in an earlier episode of The Business Coach, I was interviewing a friend of mine, Jeff Hoffman, who is the co-author of Scale with Me. And Jeff started up this itty bitty little company that grew to become Priceline.com and Booking.com. And anyways, he was sharing about how his daughter, one of them, who is in her 30s, when he was earlier on, she's saying, hey, I'm about to go off to this conference. And she said, well, what are you doing at the conference? And he said, well, I'm going to be the keynote speaker. And his daughter looked at him with total disregard and said, what do you know that they want to hear about? And I was laughing as he said that, because I'm sure you can relate to it. I'm curious, do your adult daughters come back for tax advice?
They just hand them over to us and someone in our firm prepares them. But yeah.
Okay, we take it a little bit for granted.
Yeah, that's right.
That's funny. Well, today we're going to jump into this conversation around the perspectives that a CFO brings, these secrets or these different vantage points that a CFO would look at a business and a business owner and how he or she's running their company and have insights about how they can run that company to increase revenue, to improve margins, and to increase bottom line profitability. And I know that you come from an interesting perspective on this. Number one, you and I are both business owners, so we do this in our own companies. Number two, on my side, I'm coaching companies to do this. And on your side, you actually have a virtual CFO program in your business with your CPA firm clients. And in that program, you're basically playing the middle ground right below where someone would have a fractional CFO to having you and your staff producing and providing that for. So I guess I'll start off with, when you think about this, what are the 2 or 3 most important principles or frameworks that a CFO level thinker sees a business different than how just an owner of a business might see it for themselves with a little bit less sophistication?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, as you mentioned, we have our CFO program, and what we're doing with ours is on a scheduled basis, whether it's quarterly or up to monthly, we are having that CFO to CEO conversation with our business owner clients. And what with our CFO program, we're getting our business owner clients to buy into what's called our MELT system. And MELT stands for maximize earnings and lower tax, right? Keep maximizing your earnings and lowering your tax, and just rinse and repeat. And what we do is we use private equity techniques to maximize those earnings, right? Make the money first and then lower our effective tax rate around it. So as their CFO, we're having that conversation because a business owner or founder, in many cases, focused just on running the business and providing that product or service to the customer, which is great. It does start there, but then really running business by the numbers and managing by margin, that's what we can do as a CFO, and choosing where to allocate capital, right, as you make those profits.
So I'll start us off in this conversation with, I'm thinking of a coaching client of ours who runs a construction company, and they joined the program, they started growing their revenue. And what was interesting though, was many business owners will fixate on 2 numbers on their P&L, right? They'll focus on, as you know, revenue, and then they'll focus on profit. And what they miss out on is in that focus, hyper focus on revenue, this company they took their eye off on how they managed the projects, and their gross profit margins went severely down. They were bidding out work and selling work, they thought, at 20-25% gross profit margins. But when we looked at it, their effective margins were at about anywhere from 8 to 12%. And a construction company with an 8 to 12% gross profit margin loses money, or certainly doesn't make much money.
Absolutely will lose money, yeah, because they should be
Yeah,
dropping that to the bottom line, right? To operating income.
that's
Yeah,
right.
exactly
So
right.
you, as a person coming in there, you're looking at gross profit margin. What are some of your techniques that you're going to help somebody, a business, increase their gross profit margin? What are some of the easy tricks that you know to raise gross profit margin?
Yep, a number of things. So number one, first thing right out of the gates is get your financial setup right so they can truly measure gross profit. Secondly, get the accounts in the right place. Secondly, make sure you have a good job costing method. And then third, focus on the velocity of money. That's an important concept because, as you mentioned with gross profit, in your client's case, by stringing projects out, right, time kills profit. Just like in sales, right? Time kills sales. And every day that a project, whether it's a product or a service, it continues, in quote inventory, it's collecting more days of overhead, right? It's just adding costs, right? It's not adding revenue, it's adding costs. And so those are key ways to increase your gross profit. And in a product company, they're probably looking at both product and labor up there in gross profit.
What's a job costing method? I know that this is a common term, but define it for us. Give us an example, and then how do we
Yeah,
use
yeah.
this to
So
improve
that
the
that can
margin?
be either software is the most common. Now, if folks are on a QuickBooks product, right, the job costing is going to be pretty rudimentary, pretty basic. So you may need something more advanced. In construction, you often use what's called takeoff software first. Our more commercial contractors that are doing larger jobs will get them actually on a method called percentage completion method, and that's a good way to help with job costing. Those doing quick contracts and residential, that would be overkill. And if they're in more advanced software in construction, your example, like on a Sage product, they'll have a more robust job costing system already in their accounting software. And if you don't have that, right, I know some that they'll keep a manual folder and they'll do QTM at the end of each job, or TQM, total quality management, on each job, and really dial in on that gross profit. But you got to do something.
Right. And so what you're essentially saying is we want to be able to look at, whether it be by project or by product or by service line or by location, we want to be able to look at what is our profitability. In this case, what is our gross profitability relative to that? So we can compare apples to apples. If I'm a service business and I have service lines A, B, and C, one of those service lines might be horribly unprofitable, one might be extravagantly profitable, and yet I might not be realizing I'm putting the same marketing energy and time and talent behind all three equally, which is ridiculous. I should focus in on feeding my winner with that part. And those things don't get seen. And to be able to see that on a project basis or on a product basis or some other key breakdown is important, whether your software lets you do that, QuickBooks with a class or some other component, or you're more advanced, or we do it manually. We need to be able to make intelligent choices. A CFO, he or she is going to be really good at looking at what contributes the most profit, what sucks up resources but doesn't actually deliver profit, I think is what you're saying, correct?
That's exactly right. Yep. And figure out where the profit is and where it isn't, and either fix the one that isn't or drop them, right?
Yeah.
And we do it by, in our case, by service. We call it charge code in our industry, and by client. Yep.
Yeah. You talked about velocity of money. That makes sense. I put down three more. I'll say with the velocity, I put down collections. One of the ways we kill our gross profit, especially if we're doing it the right way, which is, accrual in some respect. If I've got, $1 million I billed for this month, but I only collect 700,000 of it, my gross profit is not based on the million, it's based on collected dollars. And I think
No.
collections is a big deal. And I watch a lot of the early clients that we work with in our coaching program. We often will find a quick hit where, they say, David, I'm collecting 90% what I'm owed. And I'm like, well, think about this. You made $1 million last year in profit. If we can collect that last 10%, you're going to go from $1 million to $1.5 million, for example. You've increased your profitability by 50% just by collecting that last 10%. So it does matter, and people discard that. Do you notice that sometimes people look the other way because they don't want to look at the horror show that is their accounts receivable process?
Sure, yeah, definitely. And where that comes to is we got folks that'll look at their P&L. This is so common in small businesses, their profit and loss statement, but not their balance sheet, right? Which is where that accounts receivable is. And that should be part of the monthly packet that your bookkeeper is going over with you, right? That isn't even CFO level yet. This is basic bookkeeping. And we've run into it. This is common down in the smaller companies in the QuickBooks world because pretty much anyone can go in and pay bills in QuickBooks. So as a result, there's a decent number of unqualified quote bookkeepers out there that don't close out the balance sheet every month, right? Which is basic bookkeeping, which has kind of been lost with QuickBooks. And it's two reasons. QuickBooks is easy, and QuickBooks is the one accounting software that doesn't make you actually close the books every month, right? It just rolls and rolls and rolls. So guess what? Their books aren't closed out, and they may not even know their accounts receivables off the charts until they've got a bank problem. Yep.
Yeah. And then I'm going to put I'll just jump to the other one here. I'll put on here is just on the pricing side. I find that probably the same is true for you, that with a lot of our coaching clients, they're just scared to raise pricing. I'll give an example. Blue collar service business. This guy developed an expertise in the world of electrical work, where in his area, there's some work that he does that I'll call production work, which is anyone could do it. It's done on volume, it's done on mass. It's more of a commodity. But there's a portion of the work that he and his staff can do that no other electrical contractor within 100 miles can do. He can solve problems and no one can. And he prices everything. Before the advice that we gave to him, the coaching we gave to him, he was pricing everything the same way. And I said, this is ridiculous. If you can do brain surgery and you do general surgery, a brain surgeon's going to charge more for the brain surgery portion. And you should be pricing that based on the value delivered. Is that something that comes up for you a lot?
Yeah.
You notice the courage in pricing?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And the number one way to increase your top line, your gross profit, and your operating profit is raising prices. It's the quickest and fastest and most direct way. Any price increase drops to the bottom line. And you're exactly right. If you minimize or segregate what's commodity versus value, right, there's a lot of room to go up there. Secondly, you have to be diligent, right? A lot of us learned in 2021 were reminded how important it is to raise prices as needed. We were on with our webinars and our client alerts telling folks, hey, look at your pricing. Those in the contractor world, construction clients, they had to change at least monthly because building materials were going up during that inflationary environment, whereas they may have been used to doing it once a year. And we'd find out our clients that weren't attending our webinars or reading our client alerts, they got through and they got a big margin squeeze. And as we do this recording right now, there's proposed tariffs coming in, and tariffs are inflationary. and add to product costs. And similar price adjustments may have to be made, right? So we've been talking to our clients about making sure they're staying ahead of that.
Yeah. One of the things I know that when I talk with a real savvy person playing that role of a CFO, so our larger clients have their own full-time CFOs that run that pillar of their company. And one of the things they do really well is they'll bring in certain ways of metrics. For example, one area of metric will be on efficiency KPIs, key performance indicators, so that we have a simple way, a heuristic, that if we can look at this number and this number, it tells us how we're doing about utilizing our most expensive, important input to our product or service. Like, for example, our cost per X or some measurement of efficiency. Give us a couple examples. Give us an example perhaps for a service-based business, perhaps for a product-based business, and then give us one that might be used in a professional service firms of what would be an example of a KPI that a CFO would say, we should implement this because if we pay attention and make this number better, this is a massive leverage point to improve our profitability.
Absolutely. Yep. So, yeah, important to know the differences between product business and service business, right? So, a product business is going to be a lemonade stand, right? To put it in kids' business terms. And whereas a service business is going to be a lawn mowing company, right? Which was my first business. Well, I did both, but yeah, I had K&K lawn mowing with my brother. And so, if you're a product-based business, you got three numbers to look at: revenue, product costs, right? Your hard costs on your cost of goods, and then labor. And a service company really just has two numbers to measure: revenue and labor, two things to watch. And I'm a big, full disclosure, I'm a huge disciple of manage by margin. That's how we teach it, and that's how I run my business. So with a product-based company, you're going to look at revenue and profit per product sale. It's what is your per X, and it's per product sale, and you want to do it by product line. And if you do those, and make sure you got good job costing. The service business is a lot of fun because they're primarily going to be based on labor. So if we have two numbers to look at, revenue and labor, well, then your revenue per FTE is going to be a very important metric, right? How much per full-time equivalent. So you just break in whether you have full-time or part-time team, contractors, W-2 doesn't matter, right? Just break it into those hours. Another thing, AHR, average hourly rate. So for each dollar of labor paid, and again, whether it's W-2 contract or whatever, doesn't matter. How much revenue are you bringing in for those? If you do that, that's super important. Right.
As you say that, one of the frameworks I've always loved is that I like to think about it as X, Y, and Z. Sales per X, cost per Y, profit per Z. Sales per X is going to write what's the number that is most important to connect to revenue, whether that be sales per full-time equivalent or sales per some other piece, and then cost per Y and profit per Z. And I know for me, I'll add one more in there, which is you talk about labor. So if I'm in a professional services firm or in any service business, one of the leading indicators for my labor cost is I'll often look for a utilization metric of some sort, because the cost per labor hour, the cost of labor in my service there, that's the result in there. I sometimes want to get ahead with, I look at the utilization. So for example, if I ran a medical group, I would look at, like for example, we have a lot of dermatology clients of ours. And so I look at, if I'm them, I'm going to look at, what's the utilization? If we have each dermatologist, we've got 3 providers in a clinic, maybe 1 doctor and 2 mid-level people, and they have a total where that between them, they can see up to 100, I'll make the number easy, 100 potential patients that day, which leaves them with 500 for the week. I look at what is the utilization, because once that appointment goes by without someone there to show up that I can bill, it's now rotten fruit. It's spoiled. I no longer have the ability to sell the time from yesterday.
It's
and so I
gone
know
forever.
that's been a useful one. Does that spark anything else you'd want to
Yeah,
share about
absolutely. Yeah. And we go deeper into mid-level KPIs, right? Utilization's a key one for any service company, especially professional service firms.
Yeah.
And we look at that. Yep.
One of the other things that I know as a CFO level thinker, you're going to help them to see the future. Bookkeepers help us get clean on booking and revenue and stuff so like we can see the past. And the controller is going to help make sure that we're taking care of today and maybe the coming month or the coming quarter. But a CFO is going to get us looking out over a year, over the next multiple years with that. Give us some other insights, tips that you've learned playing this role effectively for clients that you've had.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. The bookkeepers, record history and then CFOs make history, which is why it's a C-level position, right? It's got to be strategic. So number one, we do find that helping a client really understand their balance sheet is a first step. And the second step is the one that Warren Buffett refers to as the most important skill to have, and that's knowing how to allocate capital. Meaning you generate a certain amount of capital in dollars, and the other capital you have is time and attention and network. And how you deploy that in the future to build future EBITDA, and i.e. value for your company, can be absolutely most important. And that's whether taking the dollars in your bank, dollars that you're going to bring from investors, or dollars you're going to borrow is all important, right? How you're going to deploy that, or distribute it to the shareholder, right? What you do with those dollars. And secondly, your time, attention, and network, right? How are you going to utilize that to maximize the value of the business? And that's business owners that are, getting caught up in the business on the day to day, they're often not able to step back and have that conversation and make those decisions unless we guide them to.
Yeah, and it's interesting. What I notice here, your comment about the balance sheet, I think is a fair comment, which is, it's probably the second hardest financial statement to understand. The statement of cash flows is probably the hardest for most business people. The P&L seems to make intuitive sense in a lot of ways, except for business owners get confused about that money in, money out is not the same thing as an income or expense item. They screw that part up. But the balance sheet, that's a big one. But this allocation of capital, and I like that you define capital as more than money. It's attention, it's time, it's talent, it's the opportunity or the time and attention of networks of people we have access to. And I think that's really important. And what I observe is the business owner, he or she has the benefit of their best thinking. And what happens is they get kind of tunnel visioned a little bit. And so oftentimes the person that runs their operations or the person who runs their sales or the person who runs their marketing, they've got good insight, but they might not have the same sophistication financially. And so no one really challenges the owner on what she's thinking is the best place to invest limited resources, the most expensive resources. So now this is the company that has 4 service lines, but one of them they really should just diversify away from. Yes, it generates 50% of their revenue today, but it's only responsible for 15% of their profit, and it's not the place to do. It sucks up their best people. We should diversify away. And this other one over here is the one that has a very good margin. It's expandable, and we're dominant in there. Yet we're starving it of resources because we have too much going over here. We've got to incrementally get more resource over here to do that. And I think a CFO, whether it's fractional, whether it's virtual, or whether it's even somebody that you hire full time if you're large enough of scale, you're $10-20 million plus company or greater, at some point you're going to hire that role. But that's a place where I see a CFO thinking is very different than the advice that a business person gets from just their other C-suite folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And make sure it's a true CFO rather than a glorified bookkeeper or controller. Like a $10 million company won't hire a true CFO, but they do need a great controller, right? They're worth their weight
Sure,
in
they'll do
gold.
it fractionally is what they'll likely do it, or they'll do it virtually. They're not going to have the revenue and the profit
Yep.
to make it make sense. It's not needed. Correct.
Right. Yeah. And a good CFO wouldn't take the job. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. They wouldn't be able to utilize their skill set. But yeah, and making sure you got a good strategic experienced CFO, and it can make a huge difference on not where you are today, but where you're going to end up.
Yeah, and I noticed that at a certain level, one of the things it does is it gives you a second business owner mentality looking at things. And I know in an earlier podcast, you and I were talking about the sale, the exit from a company. Now, this is a while ago. One of the things is if I look at all my team, who's going to be involved with the eventual exit, if the exit is to sell, your right-hand person for all of that is by far your CFO, full or fractional, depending what it is.
Yep. Exactly right. Yeah. And if they're a good experienced CFO, they probably already have that experience, right? Multiple times, more than you.
So let's jump into a different one, which is the access to capital markets. What are some of the tips or the secrets that a CFO thinker brings to mind about how to push down the cost of capital, how to expand the cost of or expand the access to capital for when we want to scale, whether that scaling is to organically just give more fuel to something that's working, or to actually buy all or part of multiple other businesses?
Sure, absolutely. All right, first thing for just general organic expansion, one of the best access to capital is your own P&L and balance sheet, and that's to speed up your cash flow cycle and raise your margins, and you'll generate more organic cash to grow organically. Secondly, if you're going to do non-organic growth, then accessing outside capital could be key. And you've got two main choices, your debt markets and your equity markets. And for the most part, in the last 20 years, with a few obvious exceptions, we've got pretty liquid markets with good access to. The banks have done a decent job, right? If it's a good, clean, qualified deal, right, you can get bank financing, particularly SBA, right? They are set up for business purchases. But another big trend that has really, really grown the last 10 years, especially, is private debt. And there's these organizations out there, BDCs, business development companies, that are really providing world-class debt that the banks aren't providing anymore. And for the most part, if the bond market's behaving, the cost of capital has been really good. I will mention, don't ever do any of those, advertised payday style loans. I call them payday loans from your on deck capitals and those kind of places for really any type of business move ever, because it's tough to get out of. So that's the debt market. And then sometimes though you need permanent capital and you need to seek outside investors, and you can start with the 3 Fs, right? Friends, families, and fools. And then work your way to, depending where you are in the stage of your company, whether the venture capital or the private equity market, or angel funds sometimes play a role in there.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask one last question on this subject, Kevin, which is this. When you're in there playing the role, looking at that as their virtual CFO, what are one or two of the tricks or techniques that you use and utilize to go in there to make a fairly fast improvement for it? As a coach myself, I've worked with lots and lots of companies over the years. What I find is there are certain things that I can pull out of my toolbox, and it's easy, makes an immediate impact and a fairly big impact. And the client goes, I can't believe that. It's revolutionary. And I smile and say, well, thank you. What are some of the things as a CFO person coming in there, you get to look at it and they look at you like you've just performed magic. But for you, it's a tool that's in your toolbox. You pulled it out and lo and behold, it produced a result like you knew it would.
Yep. So first I'll start with the boring one, then I'll get to the good one that they really like. First thing we'll do is clean out the balance sheet, because if they're running, on a QuickBooks product with an unsophisticated bookkeeper, it's probably wrong. And a balance sheet is simply, what do you have, right? What do you own, your assets, and who do you owe, right? Who do you owe money to? And then the leftover, the other number, is equity. And a lot of them have it all jacked up. And that's the boring one, but it's got to be done, because if your beginning and ending balance sheets are wrong, it's mathematically impossible for your profit and loss to be right. Okay, so we do that. Now we can move to the profit and loss. And our big trick, right, if I had one main one to start with, it's managed by margin. So we get their profit and loss statement, we move their chart and accounts the way their industry standards should be, right? The right stuff in cost of goods, the right stuff in G&A. And then the owner's stuff below the line is owner's discretionary. And we get a clean gross profit and clean operating profit and clean labor margins. And then we help them manage by margin, and just, hey, if they can at least get it to what the industry standard is, that's usually a first step. And then, of course, we want to be world-class and beat industry standard. And just knowing what their gross profit margin should be and what their labor margin should be and what their operating profit should be is a huge first step. Because some folks don't know that, hey, this type of service company should have a minimum of 20% operating profit. They maybe never heard. Or professional service firm, at least 30 or more, right? And just knowing that and can be a huge first step, and being able to measure it and make progress on it.
I think that's fantastic. It's not the first one, your comment is boring. It's not the sexy one there, but your comment about how do we have an accurate balance sheet that leads into an accurate P&L? We can't do that unless we've done that. And then the second one is, looking at our core result indicators, right? Our gross profit margin, our operating profit margin, our labor margin. Those are things that once we can see them, then we can say, how do we get them to be at least as good as the industry? And then if not, then how do we crush the industry? How do we do better than the industry? And sometimes just by knowing what that target is, it changes our expectations about, should we be having this many people for this number of projects, or should we be pricing this way, or should we be X? And it becomes much easier when we know that.
Yeah, exactly. And simplifies things, right? With a service company, like I said, just have two numbers, right? Revenue and labor. Just focus on that. We brought a client on one time. We're trying to have that conversation. He was getting caught in the weeds on, well, should that be dues and subscriptions or software subscriptions. And it was like, $99 a month. I was like, whoa, you're really missing the point. The fact is your labor margin's, 6 points too high. Like if we talk about subscriptions again, you're fired, right? So it's focus on what's important, right? You got two numbers to manage them,
That's
right?
right. And putting your best attention where they're going to do the most good. It's like the same thing about putting our best talent where it does the most good, putting our best money where it does the most good. This
That's
is a
right.
great example of that. Kevin, my final question to you is, what last takeaway would you want someone to leave here with today? Whenever we end an episode of the Business Coach, we're always looking for what's the most important takeaway for somebody that they're going to put into practice, taking a successful company and making it even more successful. What
Yeah,
would you
absolutely.
want them to
So
leave
I would
with?
say, if you're really looking to upgrade your company, then at some point you need to upgrade your financial pillar and act like a grown-up company. All of us start out, most of us started out bootstrapping, so I completely get it. But at some point you need to make a conscious decision to upgrade that. And when you do it, the recommended method, the one I recommend is to manage by margin, right? If you truly manage by margin, it's easy, it doesn't take a lot of time, but it produces massive results.
Love it. Low-hanging fruit and a home run in the parlance of the Maui community. That's a sweet spot right there. Manage by numbers.
Absolutely. And remember our melt system. You want to maximize earnings while lowering tax, but your first part, maximize those earnings.
I love it. Kevin, on behalf of everyone here as part of the Business Coach Podcast, thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us today. We really
My,
value that.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And
Appreciate
to
it.
all of our listeners and viewers out there, thank you. Make sure you subscribe. And I'm going to ask one more favor yet again. Who are two other business owners who run successful companies? Send them a quick text or send them a quick email saying, hey, maybe they want to come listen to this episode, get a chance to hear what Kevin's best ideas were about how to leverage CFO ideas and tactics to make your company more profitable, more successful. See you next week, everybody. Thank you again, Kevin. Bye,
You.
everybody.